All right. So glad that you're all here, and
Yeah.
so excited to turn it over to Godfrey Plata, who is a talented organizer and
Okay.
educator on
Yeah.
organizing.
You
He's
just
going to be
click
teaching
the
us a little
link and
something
you
about
begin.
a key part of the community organizing cycle called research actions,
So
or
you
sometimes known as.
can
So, without further ado, Godfrey.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I am catching RD's popcorn that is being tossed into the group chat. David, if you could give me screen sharing powers, that would be great. Hi, everyone. For folks who I don't know, my name is Godfrey. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am zooming in from Koreatown, where I live. I'm sorry that I missed the breakout rooms at the beginning of this. I was driving in from San Pedro, and if anyone has had the ability to be outside today, it is just like a shockingly crystal clear day. Today, like crystal clear to the point where it's from San Pedro. Not only could you see the mountains of Catalina, but you could see the crisp folds of the mountains and hills, and that's how far you can see today. And even on the drive back from San Pedro back to Koreatown, the same was true. I was in the South Bay still, and you could see clear through downtown LA into the mountains in the back. I am holding a lot of the beauty of where we get to live today, and I'm hoping that you all, I know we're supposed to stay in as much as possible, but for whatever safe opportunity you have to go outside, it's just a beautiful day today. I am going to share with you a less beautiful PowerPoint deck on my side of things. The mountains and Catalina are so much more pretty than this, but as David mentioned, for folks for whom I'm new, I'm a former teacher. I'm a former middle school teacher. And a lot of what I experienced as a middle school teacher was ways in which I, as a middle school teacher, was asked to keep documentation and being asked to consider policies, discipline policies that would continue the school to prison pipeline in our public education system, meaning that when students were mischievous, would get in trouble, etc., I was asked things like, do you want to press charges on this student? And they would be 12 years old, even if I hadn't had the opportunity yet to get to know their families or whatnot. Or even if I did, like I was being asked whether I wanted to pass students on to police officers that were on our campus. And I, over time, began to realize that those of us who were teachers and students and parents who saw this happen over and over and over had been seeing the same things over and over and over and felt like we were just following the rules. And it didn't occur to us until a little later on in my career that you could actually change the rules. So organizing, very much so, is about gathering folks together to be able to change laws and policies that exist in the world, and to do that through people power. And people power literally means us working together, and us working together alongside folks who have that legal power, that policy-making power, like our elected officials, means that we have to build relationships with each other and with them. And so today, I'm going to get back to this circle thing in a moment, but today we're going to go over something. It's a tool of organizing called research actions. That it's sort of like a way of building relationship with any of the people in the bullet points that I listed at the top here. So new elected officials or their teams, leaders who are being asked to implement new mandates. Like we've said yes to Measure J here, but now we have to make that happen. Right. And there are going to be people within the system right now who are going to be making that happen. And we need to be in relationship with them if we're going to hold them accountable to that and to possibly partner in that and ensure that it's going in ways that are driven by the voices in our communities and not just by the policy wonks inside. We also need to meet folks who can help move forward rejected initiatives, you know, like Prop 15, Prop 21, were voted down. And in LA County, by slim margins still, there's lots of people who could be interested in moving forward rent protections, et cetera. But we need to be at the table with those folks to help ensure that they have the people power behind them and the muscle of our lived experiences to be able to inform anything they can move forward. So we have to build these relationships ongoing. We make elected leaders smarter, and they make us smarter at the same time as we exchange in this relationship. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through what research actions achieve and then how to do them. Those are two different things. First, what achieve, and then how to do that. Research actions exist sort of at the 7 o'clock kind of part of this clock that I'm sharing with you. What I'm sharing with you is something called an organizing cycle. It's a model of how organizing can sort of work in a circular level. Right now, what we are doing is you sort of self-identified yourself as a leader at LA Forward who is interested in doing work as a larger progressive community. What we are doing now is this training piece, right? Like we are training folks on this call to be smarter as a group of organized people so that they can form teams and build community and identify shared issues that they want to work on together. LA Forward, there are groups of people here who have already begun to identify some shared issues already. Climate justice, transit justice, housing justice. But there might be more issues among us and things that are even more bite-sized than some of those big topics. And eventually, when we identify those shared issues, we can do something called research actions to help us build an agenda before we take action, which is what you see at the 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock level there. So I know there are people on this call who are like really eager to take action, be like, let's call for this change. Let's make this demand. Maybe we have some evidence already that those demands make the most sense politically right now, but research actions can help build our confidence in the demands that we are making as well, that they are possible by certain people right now. Here's what a research action is, just at its basic level. And then I'm going to show you what it does right after this. So a research action is a group meeting with someone who knows more about something than we do, has more power over something than we do. Let me share with you some important parts of this like basic definition. It's a group meeting. When I say the word research, lots of people, especially nowadays when we have the internet, et cetera, lots of people go to Google right away. They want to search something about housing or about homelessness, et cetera. Let's find out something by searching for it. This is not that. This is a group meeting because this is relational. We want people on the inside to know that we are people who exist on the outside who are interested in this. So an intention is that you are building relationship, and the only thing you are building when you are Googling something is their algorithm. That's not what we are doing here, right? Like we're here to build relationship with people who can do something. We're also seeking information that is not Googleable, right? Like if we met with, I'm making this up, if we met with Kevin De Leon right now, Kevin De Leon is our incoming, actually he's already sworn in now, I think, City Council District 14 City Council member. If we met with him right now, there might be some things that are Googleable that we can understand about his policy history. He and his team know what has come to them already that is not yet published on Google. There are inclinations he might have, orientations he might have, interests he might have, that we might only find out in an actual face-to-face or Zoom-to-Zoom meeting with someone like him or his team. The other reason why this is a group meeting and not an individual meeting is organizing is ultimately about distribution of power and dissemination of power, right? If I myself met with Kevin De Leon, the only people in that meeting who are building power are me and him, right? But if I had 8 people or 80 people like with me in a meeting with Kevin De Leon and we were asking questions about a specific part of his housing policy or anything like that, then all of us get the same information. And if something happens to me, you know, hopefully nothing, but like if something happens to me, there are other people who can move the process along. And with those 80 people in the room, it means that they can bring in other people into this investigation, honestly, right? Of like whatever it is that they're interested in. Our power is larger and it's a show of power. What we're showing, Kevin De Leon, is LA Forward is not just Godfrey, a representative. It's, oh gosh, there's like a dozen people here and they got organized enough to be here at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, that tells him something about how important of a constituency we are building, right? We're wielding power when we bring a group of people together. So this group meeting piece is really important to the nature of what a research action is. And you'll see on the screen that it generates 2 reactions. I just mentioned like part of it is building recognition for your group, building a relationship with your group, in this case, LA Forward, or any group that you're a part of, honestly. But it also helps you get more specific with the information that is inside his head, and he can get inside your head as well, right? Into like, well, what experiences are you talking about? In what ways is housing impacting your life, other people, et cetera? Again, there's this exchange of information. The other reaction I really enjoy is actually at the bottom of this. If you come with like a dozen people, I don't know, like before I started organizing, I never thought that I could be at the same table with folks who are making high level decisions at a school district, the city, et cetera, right? Like we're socialized over time to believe that we are other from them and they are other from us, and you got to be special in order to get their attention. That's not true, right? Like they represent us. That means we have the power to be at the table with them, and they should be listening to us, and they want to. By and large, in my experiences, lots of leaders do want to engage with constituents. So I think that's a reaction that we get. We feel more powerful as a result of this. Let me pause here for a moment. We're going to do a short kind of like exercise in a moment to give you a sense of what you could learn from a research action. But any basic questions about what a research action is for the moment? I'm also trying to open up my chat box because I don't see anything in the chat box. Okay. Here's what you can learn from a research action. So this is where I want you to start thinking about things that you are curious about or issues that you are curious about. Some of you have heard me do this spiel before. Others of you have not. But there's this thing that I am obsessed with called 3 windows theory. 3 windows theory is a way of organizing what you are learning about a particular issue so that you can strategically go into action when you have enough information about something. So in 3 windows theory, feel free to screenshot or, whatever, take a picture of the screen, draw this on your page or whatnot. But in 3 windows theory, there are, 3 windows. There's a problem window, a policy window, and a person window. And just like windows, you can open or close them. 3 windows theory says that all 3 windows have to be open for you to go into action to make something happen. And when I mean that they have to be open, if you imagine, my favorite metaphor is Katniss Evergreen from Hunger Games. She's the one with the bow and arrow. If I were Katniss Evergreen and I had a bow and arrow, I could sail an arrow through all 3 windows at one time without the arrow bouncing from any window. That's what I mean, that all windows have to be open. Our work as organizers is to open the windows, identify open windows, or keep the windows open. So that's like part of the work that we are doing as we're investigating a particular issue. That will become clearer as I talk about each window. And after I talk about all 3 windows, I'm going to pause and ask you all to generate all the examples of where you see these 3 windows. So think of examples as I am walking through this right now. So the first window is the problem window. A problem window is widely and deeply felt and widely known. Or you have a problem when it is widely and deeply felt and widely known. Then this window is open. Let me give you an example. For centuries, the problem window has been widely and deeply felt by the Black community that police brutality is real. Like that's a problem that has been widely and deeply felt for centuries. But until people began to film and disseminate the films of acts of police brutality, things have not been widely known until relatively recently, unfortunately. But because of the dissemination of a lot of videotapings of police violence, more and more policymakers and people are able to point to something to say, actually, this is a problem. Those are the things that open up this problem window. And so as organizers, in order to open the problem window, we have to be in conversation with each other about what is widely and deeply felt in our communities and make them widely known. Ways you can make things more widely known, teach-ins like the ones LA Forward has. You can write newspaper op-eds, you can get on the news around something, you can go canvassing, right? Like any way you can imagine a megaphone getting bigger, about making something widely known. That's how you get this problem window open. Some windows are already open, others are closed, and it's our job to then open those windows. So think of examples, because I'm going to come back to everyone in a little bit and ask for examples for problem window. The policy window is the second window that you need to open. The policy window is a specific policy solution to a part of the problem. So when I was organizing around school to prison pipeline issues, I was organizing with a bunch of people around closing an alternative school that was built by the Corrections Corps of America. Corrections Corps of America builds private prisons. And they also happened to build this facility that we sent hundreds, if not thousands of students to when they were overly suspended. And this was in Texas at the time that I was organizing. And taxpayers were paying $11.9 million a year to keep this facility open. And so shutting down the school is too big of a specific, that is a specific solution to the problem of the school to prison pipeline, but it doesn't shut down the school to prison pipeline altogether, right? Like shutting down a single facility does not completely dismantle the school to prison pipeline. So if the school to prison pipeline was a problem window, a policy window could be shutting the school down. It could be taking $3 million from the school and investing it in social emotional supports. It's all the different ways you can partially attack the problem window. But the policy window is concrete. There's also a timeline to it, specific. And so, we may think of the problem window as very general. The policy window is specific solutions. Okay? So both of those windows happen at the same time. Last window, the person window. The person window is a specific person who can make that happen for you. And that is the policy window. So who specifically can make the policy window happen to attack the problem window? Sometimes we can get really caught up with winning the number of people we need on a particular board. So at the time when I'm thinking about that alternative school example, I think there were 9 people on the board. If I remember correctly, 9 people on a school board or something like that. You don't necessarily need all 9 people, right? You just need specific people to be able to make the thing happen. That's your person window that you need to open up. Like, who are they and how do you get them to do that? What's going to influence them to do that? So that was pretty quick, and I'm going to be quiet for a moment, but I'd love to hear examples or questions about each of these 3 windows, because your research actions that you have when you meet with elected officials, leaders, etc., your goal is to try to get to find out as much about these windows as possible as they know in their heads about a particular issue. Let me pause there and see what examples or questions you all have. I see that Misty says, can you please show the people window again? Yeah, I can show it.
Godfrey, can you talk a little bit about the policy window and like how you identify what would be the best way? Like you were saying,
Yeah.
you could shut down the facility, but that doesn't really have a big impact. So maybe reallocating funds, like how do you zero in on which policy you want to try to get through?
That's great. So research actions are curiosity based. Sometimes we think, especially as organizers, when we see organizing work that happens today, sometimes we only see it when it is escalated to protests in front of a house or rallies, etc. In this form of organizing, this is curiosity based, and all we're doing is asking for information from an elected official or leader. And so something that we literally could do is, if we were saying, for example, if we were meeting with Nuri Martinez, who is the president of the city council right now, and I believe District 6, if I'm remembering correctly, we could ask, like, what are, like, on your radar, what are some of the possible policy solutions to accelerate the housing of folks who are unhoused in Los Angeles right now? And like, literally by asking that question, what we're doing is asking her for just just try to tell us as much as you can at that point. And as we are listening to their sharing of these like possible solutions, we can then ask follow-up questions in that conversation to get a sense of which of them feels like it is getting the most support, which one faces the most challenge, what are the challenges behind a particular policy solution. The questions we want to ask basically are getting us into her head about the way she sees all these different policy solutions. So we are learning everything as much as she's able to tell us, right? We learn much as we're able to find out from her about what she knows. And we're triangulating what she is telling us with other people we're having research actions with, right? So let's say then we met with Mike Bonin, who is a city council representative on the West Side. Let's say we met with Mark Ridley Thomas, who will be the new city council District 10 person. We're just meeting with all of these different city council folks and asking them the same question and then triangulating their information. Then we as an organized group of people can come to an evaluation of potentially like the thing that is going to solve the problem the best, the thing that we have the most energy to organize around, the thing that is most likely to pass, right? Like when we have all of that, then we, the people, can help make the decision for them, if that makes sense. So we don't necessarily have to be the policy wizards. We can be like like if there's a clear policy solution that our comes up with, we can float that around in these conversations as well to see how they think about it. In which case, cool, like maybe that is the policy solution, the policy window we want to push forward. But really what we're trying to do is see who already has thought about, like we're not the only ones thinking about this. And like people are approaching them all the time. We want to get their assessment and then layer our assessment on it and then get behind something if we know that there's a pathway to win. Does that make sense, Nadia? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other questions about any of these windows? But I'm also looking for examples. Like what examples does this make you all think about?
I have an example, maybe. Thank you, Godfrey, for this. I'm just realizing how little I know about actually getting things done on a strategic like policy level. So this is all very interesting. And I'm just wrapping my head around it. But my neighbor going through, this is a very localized example, but where basically there's like an open hillside that nobody knew who owned it and no one really thought much about it. We just walked there. But then surveying stakes showed up one day and we all started realizing that actually it's owned by a developer and he has a plan for 13 or more luxury homes. And, we're still like very much in the middle or in the beginning stages of it. But I basically sort of watched me and my neighbors like go from like, I don't want this next to me. And so there's 5 of us that are pissed because it's going to affect like 5 homes, and then as we talk to more neighbors, we start realizing like, oh, this developer has done other shitty developments and other people don't like him in the neighborhood. And after going to a bunch of neighborhood council meetings, we started going to like the River Communities Association meetings. We had Garcetti talk to us about it. They just met with De Leon's new people, the field deputy, who is really sympathetic. And so I can kind of see, I'm only peripherally involved in all this, but I can sort of see how it's gone from like, not in my backyard and like nobody knows what to do about it, to sort of going to all these different neighborhood council, different community meetings, talking to the policymakers. And I'm seeing that we're shifting our focus on like the historic aspect, like the field deputy is a geologist, we're focusing on the geology of it because she's sympathetic to that. And it seems like we're starting to have a better chance of getting on the good side of the people who like figuring out who cares and how to like get them involved and getting a greater part of the community involved too.
Mm-hmm. When in this example, like I heard very clearly your discovery of a problem window, right? Like
Yeah.
you were like, oh, like surveying stakes. Like people started to both feel and know about it, but then you were kind of figuring out as you were meeting with all these different groups, who does know about this? What do they perceive as the problem here? I heard you do kind of that research action work, if it were in groups of people, right? Of like, what is the problem window here? Or what problem window are people seeing? I'm not sure what the policy windows are that are available to you to attack problem. And I imagine there's lots of policy windows depending on what different groups perceive the problem window to be.
Right.
Well, and then like any of the people that you mentioned might be the person, like we don't know, like in your case, like we don't yet know who the right person window is to be able to make whatever change it is that you all might want to see. Or maybe you do, like through the process. I know you just like shared really quickly here, but I think that's a really great example of how even without having this framework, you are beginning to collect this information. And I hope that this framework provides you a little bit more strategy, to your point, right? Like strategy to be like, okay, like what windows do we have open? How do they work together? What do we want to work toward? Love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other examples people can think of, or any people that that this makes people want to ask questions to? We want to get inside this person's head about this.
Well, I do have a follow-up question then about that, because you're right, the policy is the big question mark. Like, how do we get something in stone? So with these three windows, like, is there a strategic order to which one opens first? Or like if two of them are open and you just need that one more, like how much do they feed each other?
Yeah. I don't think they necessarily have to go in order. I think in a very linear organizing cycle, if you really think like you've identified a problem that is like on no one's radar right now, then you could go in order, right? Like, okay, like I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of an example right now of like something we don't know about, but like, no, if you could go in order if you think that other people aren't familiar with the problem, that's not widely known enough or widely felt enough. But sometimes some of these just open for us. So for example, like if there was, here's an awful example, I hope this doesn't happen, but like if like the big one, an earthquake happened like today, right? New problem window opens like immediately there, that demands new policies, different people, etc. So like, it also influences other organizing cycles. Like there might be some things that are like top of the radar right now for some elected officials or decision-making bodies. And as soon as something different happens, a new problem window opens, people's attention shifts. And so it's hard to always say that this is always going to be in our control enough to be a linear process. You just kind of like it is our job to identify open windows or work to keep them open at the time. Here's like another example that makes me think about. In education, unfortunately, like superintendents kind of go on like this musical chairs kind of thing around the nation. Like bigger districts tend to recruit from medium-sized districts for superintendents, things like that. And so you could be working on something with a superintendent in one district, all of a sudden they move districts and they get taken up somewhere else, and then you're back from scratch in your organizing work again, and that person window is closed if you are working with that particular superintendent in a particular context. So these open and shut all the time. So it's a vague answer to your question, but they move.
So this is not linear. It doesn't have to be necessarily in that order, problem, policy, person. Because like we had the pallet shelter initiative in our neighborhood. which was a policy that was going to be enacted, but Krikorian did it kind of on the DL, even though he said he told people. Don't mind this one. He said he told people. So as it started to leak out, there was this widely felt conflicting feeling about it. Please stop. And so then I organized a little bit to try to present to my local neighborhood council to get them to publicly put support for Krikorian. So is that kind of still the same thing where it's like windows, but just out of order?
Possibly. It sounds like there was someone you already knew you wanted to influence. So like maybe like the person window was there, but you were trying to figure out where like a particular policy that you were trying to open the policy window at the same time that a person window is already open.
Yeah, it's like the policy window was open.
Yeah.
And then the problem one was starting to open, but the person, like neighborhood council, hadn't even heard about it.
There you go. Yeah.
So it was like,
yeah,
not linear.
Yeah, it's kind of like maybe, you know, this graphic on the screen makes us think it's linear, and my presentation did as well. I wonder if it is helpful to see each of these three windows as if they were on a wall, right? And we're just looking at the wall and we're like trying to like get them open to be able to do something. Maybe that is like one way to visualize this.
Yeah.
I think your example is a good one there. Gosh, you made me think of something, Nadia, and I'm forgetting what it was. I'll remember it, and it's fine. Other examples that are coming up for you all. And what I want to do is now move on to, after this example stage of things, I want to move on to what do these look like, these actual conversations. Like, stop sharing just quickly, because for some reason I can't see the chat box when my thing is open, but I'm scrolling. I'm scrolling through people's questions. Share your questions out loud if you had a question that was like coming up. What happens to the information gleaned from a research action? Does an organization such as LA Forward then collect it all and create further potential mass actions based on that? Like this information is intended, like when you go through the research action process and you're collecting information and getting to the heads of folks, that information, you decide what you want to do with that, right? Like you're becoming smarter and you decide how democratically you want to share that, in my head, the more public information is, the more we're actually living into democracy. That is my like orientation. Part of what research actions do is they get into closed doors of public officials whose jobs are actually supposed to be public business, but are too often made in private. And so we get in there, right? Like we get in there and pull the information out that ever when they're not just sharing forthrightly or making public in that kind of way. So it's up to you and the group what you want to do with that. If you wanted to build a coalition with another group and started sharing this information, that's up to you strategically, based on what it is that you want to get done, I suppose. Please post the policy window again. So I will do that. Last questions before I move on to sort of the structure of what a research action meeting looks like. Okay, thanks for being at Sunday school today, y'all. Sunday school with Godfrey. Here is an overall, and I'm happy to share this PowerPoint too after the fact, since I know you're not able to necessarily note take on all the slides or whatnot. So this is what a research action typically looks like. Ideally, in a pandemic world, they are in person. They are not like typically not phone calls, typically not, like they're like you want to build relationship, and relationship building is more effective in person. This is what you see on your screen is kind of like a general agenda of what you would see. And in a moment, I will share an actual agenda of a research action that the LA Ford Transportation Justice Group used when we met with the ED of Streets for All, which is a local organization that works on transit justice stuff. You start with just introductory rounds. Like the idea is that you want the folks you are meeting with, like the elected officials meeting with, to understand what power and perspective you have. So if I said, hi, like, my name is Godfrey. I'm leading some neighborhood organizing work for LA Forward. LA Forward has 11,000 members on its mailing list. Like literally just dropping that, like drop that little fact on there gives like the elected leaderess power you are bringing at the table. So you want to like introduce yourself in ways that credential you as folks who are important and that necessitate this person's attention. You want to start the meeting with like relational questions to understand who you're meeting with. So it might be important to, for example, I don't know, Mark Ridley Thomas, he just moved from the county supervisor's office to city council. And so like it might be interesting to ask questions about like why he decided to like make those moves, what kind of changes was he interested in seeing, what does his family think of that? Like, and I'm intentionally asking like personal questions because I want to get a sense of like what motivates him personally, right? Like, how does he think about his family? I might ask like, what have your like community supporters thought of this move? Because I want to hear him say what community supporters he's thinking about, right? I'm understanding the interests of the person that we are meeting with as we're building relationship of it, and we're making a mental map of how to influence this person. Because if he's motivated by a particular church, a particular community organization, a particular union, that's important for us to know in case we need to push him somewhere, right? So we want to then introduce our research area, right? So let's say we were working on supports for accelerating the housing of unhoused folks. Like we want to get a sense of his particular interests in it. So we might ask a question. This is this third bullet point. We might ask a question for like, like you are just heading into office right now in city council. Like, what is the first thing around supporting the unhoused community that's on your mind? And I just want to get, again, very open-ended. We want to ask open-ended, curious questions that wouldn't necessarily be Googleable at the same time, because what we're trying to learn is what's in his head, what has come onto his radar, what's come onto his desk. And so in that way, we're beginning to like look at the windows and see how he thinks about the windows. He might say, actually, I've already been talking with this coalition of organizations and we plan to propose something in February about this, right? Like, boom, like that begins to like open possible windows. And maybe that it's just not been published in LA Times. It's just like not out there yet, but now we're learning about it. If it's something that is favorable to us, because sometimes elected leaders are proposing things that are like favorable to the things that we want, like we're here to like help, right? Like, hey, if we have 11,000 people, what are the ways in which we can help this move forward, right? Or like, what challenges are you encountering on city council? Like, who do we need to convince to make this happen? We're getting a sense of how he thinks about power, right, on the city council and what he needs to make this happen. So that way we're identifying ourselves as potential collaborators and co-conspirators in this as well. We're making ourselves useful in his endeavor. If he starts to say things that are like so far from what we would want, for a reason, that tells us something too, right? It then it positions us to be like the informants. And I've definitely been in organizing initiatives where through research actions, it's become clear that there were policymakers not doing their research. And so a particular tactic of ours is actually to produce the white paper or produce the policy research, et cetera, to push that forward for them. Because otherwise they just haven't done the work, right? At that point. Again, that tells us something about our positioning toward this person. And then ultimately you want next steps. All of this happens in the course of a group conversation, as I mentioned, typically between 30 minutes and an hour. What you want, ideally, is them wanting more from you. Like that's how you want to leave this meeting. You want to leave this meeting with you feeling valuable to this elected leader. That's how you know like you've got some power. And that keeps you at the table to keep hearing the developments as they come in, right? Like you want to be in on the process. Again, that's like this thing about like, this is public business and we are the public. Like we need to be in this the entire step of the way. So let me, I'm gonna stop sharing right now and actually put into the chat box a sample agenda that we've used. But what reactions do folks have about anything that I'm sharing about what these research actions typically look like or feel like?
Can I just say how like spot on Godfrey is? Haven't done a lot of these myself, especially this year, but it's just like I think he has nailed it. So I knew he would, but I can't say that.
What am I nailing, David? Like underline the main points. Like what am I nailing?
Thank you, Professor. No, it's a very good point. I was being very general. I think I mean everything, but like the listening for information and triangulating is really important. The other piece is like they could become a potential ally, and like I think sometimes we spend a lot more time, we attack the politicians we don't like, which is fair, but like when they're on our side or like probably like we need to, like they are going to need support to help flip another council member, and they can't, because of some laws, they actually can't necessarily talk directly to all their different council members. So it's like knowing when to do that, when to back them up and collaborate with them, and then when you like need to go the other way, like building that relationship so you know how to operate with them, I think can be so crucial. And then I think the next piece is that, like you said, sometimes they haven't done their homework. I would say like a huge number of times they haven't done their homework. Getting the weeds on something, like sometimes, but sometimes the council members are not always sending their best. Whether it's staffers, sometimes in a single council office, some staffers will be really knowledgeable and others won't be. Some council members, Mike Bonin or Phil Keel is like super knowledgeable, and in addition to being progressive, just knows their stuff. And you have some council members who just don't even care about the policy and just like try and impress people or just kind of being lazy in office. So there's such a wide range. So the importance of not taking anything for granted, not making assumptions, and going in and like learning firsthand where they're at is so important.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a difference between activism and relational organizing that is sometimes hard to like pull apart. In particular in Los Angeles, where we have plenty of reason to be angry, to be frustrated, and to like be at last wit's ends. I think lots of activists are trying to make as much of the point as possible that they want to make in order to help like just keep the fire on underneath like people who have the ability to do things like elected officials or whatnot. In relational organizing, there are times in which we polarize, but there are also times in which we then de-escalate and de-rise, because at the end of the day, like what we need is a relationship with folks on the inside so that we can make demand when we can, right? Like it is this like back and forth. There's this phrase, no permanent enemies, permanent allies in organizing. Like you are always just in relationship with each other to support the enacting of whatever the people's needs are. And like there's not going to be a perfect person out there who's going to be able to meet every need at every time. I struggle with this. Some of you know that I've dabbled in some electoral politics recently, and it's weird being an organizer who knows that there's that like distance that you want to like maintain from elected officials, and then striving to go on the inside at the same time is this really weird tension. But there is that. I just put into the chat box for folks who didn't see, this is a sample agenda that a group of us who are on the Transportation Justice Working Group used when we were meeting with the Streets for All Executive Director, Michael. What we were trying to do, just to put this agenda in context of a research action campaign, like we literally this week, the week of August 31st, we met with like a different organization every single day with a very similar agenda. And again, it's about translating the information. Our question ultimately was to figure out if we as a transportation justice group through LA Forward wanted to put our energy behind something, what should we put our energy behind? And to do that, we had to like ask all of these other groups who have been doing this 100% full-time of their capacity, what they were already working on, what was on their radar, what they saw were the challenges, et cetera. And so you see exactly as I shared on the PowerPoint slide, it starts relationally, just like, here's what LA Forward is, here's who's here, et cetera, right? It is helpful to have someone who ran for city council there with you, Dr. Lundquist, like was there, right? It is helpful to have people who have done, who are are involved in like neighborhood council stuff. Like it's been helpful for folks who have been out there actually doing activism on their own. So it's really interesting to then bring a group of people who have things that this person might want there. And then, as you can see in the questions, like we didn't reveal all of our questions right away, but this gives you some structure to a conversation. Like the question, why Streets for All, and where do you see Streets for All's work in relationship with other groups in LA? Like that is about learning about Michael as an executive director, right? Like, why did you start this organization and how are you positioning it knowing that there are other organizations out there? Or like, it's about learning what is in their head a little bit and what motivates them, what interests them. And then this question B, what are the biggest opportunities for transportation justice wins right now? I'm looking for windows, right? Like what windows does he see open? Like this question of what has accelerated that work is going to tell me who is working on this, what are like who are the champions, who are the people we should be meeting with. Same thing with this, like what feels just beyond out of reach. This gives me a sense of what our people power could do. If this is just beyond reach for you, now what if you know that 11,000 people could be behind you, right? Like this gives me a sense of like where power could go. And then who else should we connect with or work with? This question is about like, again, we're becoming the experts here. Ultimately, when we're triangulating this, like we become the experts because they're not all meeting with each other necessarily, but we're meeting with all of them. So who else do they credential as folks interested in this same kind of subject matter that we are? So this is a sample research action meeting. Again, it's all curiosity-based, just learning information to make us smarter and to make them smarter at the same time. And I think I mentioned that we were meeting with 3 organizations 3 days in a row. By the time we got to Tuesdays and Wednesdays meetings, we were actually saying like, well, when we met with Streets for All 2 days ago, this is what they said. What do you think about that, right? It's positioning us again as these triangulators who are here at the table, playing on the same playground they are, and it's informing them. Like we begin to be the experts of some of the issues and policies that they could be evaluating. This is just a basic agenda that you could pretty much translate into any particular situation. Questions about the agenda, and then I think our goal is to put people into breakout groups, if I understood the agenda correctly, David, to get people thinking about possible next steps for where to apply this kind of stuff. But any questions about the agenda at all from folks about what?
Hey, Godfrey, it's Amy.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. So I know I attended your neighborhood organizing teach-in a while ago, and I think a big piece of that is also very relational and building relationships with others in your community, but it wasn't as focused as like specific policy or so I was curious like how or if this research action would tie into neighborhood organizing and how that could potentially meld together, because I feel like there's a lot of elements here that very much are similar, minus that big piece of like focusing on one specific problem through that problem window.
Yeah, I have like 2 thoughts, and then would love to hear just like, again, this is generative, right? Like we've never done this before at LA Forward in this way, neighborhood organizing. So please like leverage this tool in ways that you see it could be useful for the organizing work we're doing. But 2 ways I see us leveraging research actions are, I'm on what we call the DTLA plus neighborhood organizing group. I live in Koreatown, and from here all the way to downtown, we meet once a month to build relationship, et cetera. It is clear that there are 2 issues that come up pretty frequently in our group. One is supporting folks with housing. The second is environmental justice type of stuff. So if I wanted to, for example, or if we wanted to, we could say like, hey, who's actually focusing on environmental justice specifically in the downtown context for whatever reason, right? Like we would then write, potentially write cold emails requesting like 30-minute or hour-long conversations with these various groups or specific people in those groups. We could come back to the LA Forward Google group or on the Slack, the LA Forward Slack, and say like, hey, like these are the types of people we are meeting with. Does anyone know anyone in that world? And that way, it's always easier to get a meeting with someone when you already have a connection who knows them, right? So to get an e-introduction. to them. So I think we could schedule research actions to dig deeper into our local contexts with whatever issues have come up just naturally for the group. I think a second way we could use research actions is, in addition to neighborhood organizing groups at LA Forward, we have issue groups. And so there's a climate group, there's a transportation justice group. So it's possible that through research actions, the issue groups might learn something that directly could be interesting to a specific neighborhood group. So for example, through the transportation justice research actions, we actually do know that there's like some interest in having smarter streets in South LA along a particular road. I want to say it's Manchester. I forget which. This was like in September when we were having these conversations. But then why haven't we connected to the South LA group, to the South LA neighborhood organizing group, and had those kinds of conversations and brought them in? Right. So those are two different ways I can imagine using research actions, but I'm totally interested in hearing more about what ideas y'all have to leverage this too. Any other questions or ideas that come up as a result of this?
I think my biggest question is that, like, once you've organized and you've done your homework and you get that meeting with that person that you've identified that has that power to either to maybe help you along the way or help push that policy through, if when you meet with them and you start learning about them and you realize that they haven't done the homework or they have a completely opposite approach, like let's say like homelessness, they lean towards criminalizing versus compassionate approach, then what is that next step? Like, how do you decipher, like, how can you use that conversation, I guess? Like, where do you go from there?
Yeah. So a number of different ways, and this is where like it's strategizing, right? Like you come together as a group of folks who were sitting in this meeting, you all heard the same things, and you generate ideas for how to proceed. Are you then like meeting with other folks who might be better champions or stronger champions, knowing that you're not going to be able to push this person forward as easily? That's a question, depending on like what you're trying to push forward. If this person is the key holder, like if you know, like, oh gosh, they are like the person window, then you use what you know about their self-interest ultimately to see how you can get them to move. So one thing I've learned through organizing is like all too often, those of us who are organizing for social justice reasons are really interested in moving people because of the morality of a situation or the righteousness of a situation. You don't have to like change their heart to get them to do something. We spend a lot of time trying to change people's minds when really you just need to make them do something, and that's different. And so if we were like, you know, if someone was holding the keys to, I'm making something up, if someone's holding the keys to being able to open up 6,000 new beds for unhoused folks in Los Angeles or something, and in our meeting, it was very clear they weren't going to be able to do that. Our question becomes, what would make them do that? Who could make them do that? If not us, then someone else has the keys to them, right? Or a set of things. Sometimes there are groups in LA who have, you know, as you can imagine, like people are protesting at people's houses, waking them up in the middle of the night. That's one attempt to go after the self-interest of a particular elected official's piece, right? If their neighbors begin complaining that this is happening every day, it's keeping everyone up, that's an attempt at their self-interest and being able to live where they live in peace. There might be other ways around that, right? It might be like, what are the votes that they need to stay in office next? Like, it's about like us holding them accountable to that. Like, if they don't commit to a particular policy, then they're not going to get these votes, and we organize to get votes away from them. Black Lives Matter has done that really proficiently. More than that, proficient is not a great word for that, but like, I mean, like, Jackie Lacey must go. Like, it was just so clear what was being held over her head because of the lack of movement on police accountability, right? So like what is in someone's self-interest becomes the next question, if and only if they are the only key. But again, like if you have other places where you can move things forward, why spend your time trying to convince someone who's not going to move? You make that assessment.
So then the research shifts from identifying like possible policies to identifying allies.
Person windows.
Person windows. Okay.
Which person windows can make this happen for you? And if you arrive again at like, oh gosh, this person is the only person window, that's when you begin digging into their self-interest. Like, what is going to motivate this person?
Could the person window be other like bigger coalitions? Like, could the person window, if we can't get our elected officials on board, then getting like the BLM or like DSALA or some of the bigger names?
Yeah, and I mean, I know there are questions in the chat box right now, but that's a little bit of the problem window, right? Like, why aren't those groups already doing this? Like, then you're opening the problem window for other groups to help get interest, right? Like, you're making the problem more widely known at that point.
Okay.
I see there are questions. Lauren?
Hi, Godfrey. So one of the things I've been thinking about as you talk is how often newcomers to a situation will be acting without consulting the people who've been living with it for decades. Could you talk a little bit about that? That go into people who think they are the only ones who've been fighting this problem. I'll give you an example. In Echo Park, gentrification has been an issue for a generation. And now we're hearing a lot about our neighborhood from newcomers, when in fact, we've been fighting this for decades. And it's caused a lot of conflict to the point where it's obscuring what we could actually be joining forces on and working together on.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. And in particular for LA Forward, for learning about organizing for the first time here, we have to remember always, 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 we're probably not the only ones asking the questions we're interested in. And we certainly haven't been the only ones doing it, like, or the people have been doing it before us, basically, like exactly what Lauren was saying. I mean, you made the point, Lauren. I think that's exactly right. I think that one way of helping to ensure that we are working with folks who are already doing this work and already experiencing and traumatized by so many different policies that are being maintained out there is in the problem, when we're in the problem window stage of things, like there's this tool called house meetings that I think some people here are familiar with, where the point is actually to ask around and bring groups of people together to ask about like what pressures people are feeling most on their lives. And if people have already been engaged in this work, they will like share that information with you, and you'll begin to learn over time, even as you're digging into a problem for the first time, that you'll just get connected more quickly with the folks that Lauren you're highlighting. You have stuff to add, Lauren?
Yeah, I do actually. So the two things that occur to me are, and I struggle with this myself sometimes, is that I often do more talking than listening, and often I can be a little bit hyper focused on my goal and necessarily realizing that there may be other strategies out there. And so I guess the word that I'm really searching for is humility. And I'm reminded a lot these days, actually I think about her a lot, Ella Baker, when she was preparing, for those of you who don't know, she was the person who conceived of and then trained the members of SNCC, and then sent them out like disciples to help with getting voter registration in the South. And she told them several things, but the most important one was that they were going to have to live alongside the people they were claiming to help, right? Not speak for them, but learn to help them speak for themselves. And that is so often lacking in activist groups that I'm a part of. There's that. The second piece is that when we talk about relationships, the other part I haven't heard of this really, and I think we need to be not only mindful of, but mindful in practice of building trust. And trust is built by acting. and acting with humility. And that is something that's really not at the forefront of what we're doing. We have good intentions, but they are often, in my opinion, derailed by arrogance and a kind of chauvinism, especially from those of us who may be more educated than the people we claim to be helping. To use Ella Baker again, lift as you climb. Strong people do not need strong leaders. We're successful when we are obsolete.
Mm,
So that's pretty much all I have right now.
thank you, Lauren. What I want to do is give people, I believe this is, David, how you wanted to sort of like wrap things up.
Yeah, well, I think whatever you think is, I was thinking actually the breakout would be after this, but we could do whatever you think is the best way to do it. I defer to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I think would be useful for folks is to be able to think of opportunities to potentially apply this, right? Like this isn't just like, oh, that's interesting research actions, cool. Like my hope is that like you all are generating ways to be able to apply this. Let me share just one final slide, and then maybe David, I can throw things back to you to bring us into some final conversation groups. How do why this is a struggle? Okay. Okay, great. Basically, like there are many groups at LA Forward that already exist, these neighborhood organizing groups, issue groups, or maybe just groups of people that you all know even outside of LA Forward. But the first steps in applying research actions are aligning on which windows you're most interested in investigating. Right, that may be a little bit of, Amy, what your question sounded like a little bit, just like, okay, like what do we do with this now? And you may need to help create a space where people are talking about what they're curious about the most. And who else they need to engage and learn what they are curious about as well, to Lauren's point. There are ways in which LA Forward may be able to support the work of existing groups of people if we are scheduling meetings that for whatever reason other people aren't getting for whatever reason. I think that some initial next steps could include brainstorming a list of people that you want to build a relationship with. And that could be attached to things that were coming out of the election. It could be things separate from the election altogether. Don't write off anyone for fear that you're not going to get a meeting with them. Is one thing that I would say. A cold email surprisingly can work, even with like the most highest up people. I was working with folks around school to prison pipeline work here in Los Angeles, and unfortunately, our LA schools have their own police department. I didn't know who the police chief was. I literally wrote an email to the police chief saying like, hey, I have a group of students who would love to meet with you about XYZ. Got a response within 5 minutes to schedule a meeting, right? Like, don't write off anyone from wanting to engage with you at all. So this is where I think you could go just logistically. I just don't know how you all want to apply it. And so I'd love for David to, as part of our last breakout groups today, to give us some space to maybe generate some ideas for ways we can use this. Who shall we write emails to and why and all of that. Or if we're not ready to write emails yet, who do we need to talk to before we write emails? This is the perfect time to write emails too, because I'm not sure how many people are trying to meet before the holidays, but schedule meetings for January, right? Like there's like, you can get ahead now and get on their calendar for the beginning of 2021. That's it, David.
That was great. Thank you so much, Godfrey. I'm going to turn off the recording. Is that cool, people? If you don't, people hearing at home don't need to see the instruction. Okay, hold on one second.